I thought forgiveness would bring peace. But when my children finally came home, they told me something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my husband's death. And once again, my heart broke. Only this time for a different reason. After the funeral, I thought that was the end of my pain. But grief, it's strange. It doesn't fade. It just changes its face. Sometimes it hides behind silence. Sometimes it comes disguised as truth you weren't ready to hear. When they finally knocked on my door, months after their father's funeral, I was ready to forgive, but I wasn't ready for the truth they brought with them. It had been nearly 6 months since Richard's passing. The house had grown warm again. The smell of freshly baked bread replaced the scent of grief. Neighbors would stop by. I had friends now, and laughter had begun to return in small, fragile doses. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I heard a knock. When I opened the door, all 3 of them were standing there. Samantha holding flowers, James with tired eyes, Emma barely holding back tears. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then I said softly, "You finally came home?" They didn't speak at first. They just hugged me, all at once, like they were trying to make up for every hug they'd missed. And for a moment, I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe we were finally healing. But that night, everything changed. We sat at the dinner table, the same one where Richard used to read the newspaper, where he'd always say grace before every meal. Samantha spoke first. "Mom, there's something we have to tell you." Her tone was calm, but her hands were trembling. I smiled faintly and said, "You don't have to explain, sweetheart. I've already forgiven you." But she shook her head. "No, Mom, this isn't about that." James looked down, his voice low. "Dad didn't just die of sickness." The room went quiet. My heart dropped. I whispered, "What do you mean?" Samantha took a deep breath. "Dad, he knew. He knew months before he told you how bad it really was." I frowned. "I know, darling. He didn't want to worry me." But she shook her head again. "No, Mom, it's more than that. He didn't tell you because he was protecting us." Protecting them? From what? James pulled out a folded letter, old, crumpled, with my husband's handwriting. "He gave this to me," James said quietly. "He told me not to open it until after the funeral." I could barely breathe. He opened the letter, his voice cracking as he read. "To my children, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There are things your mother doesn't know. Things I hid, not out of shame, but to keep her heart safe. Please tell her when the time feels right. You'll know when." My hands were shaking. "Tell me what?" I whispered. Emma started crying. "Mom, Dad didn't die from natural causes." My stomach turned cold. "What are you saying?" "He stopped his treatment," Samantha said softly. "He signed himself out. He told the doctor he didn't want to live on machines. He said he'd rather spend his last weeks at home, watching the sunrise with you." I covered my mouth, tears spilling down. All this time, I thought he fought till the end. But he had already chosen to leave, on his own terms. And suddenly, every memory, his calmness, his faint smile, his quiet eyes, made sense. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by his empty chair, staring at the shadows on the wall. He'd kept it from me, not because he didn't trust me, but because he loved me enough to carry the pain alone. For years, I thought love was about doing everything together. But maybe real love is when you let go, so the other person doesn't have to suffer with you. The next morning, I found myself at his grave. The air was heavy, but warm. I whispered, "You stubborn man. You didn't even give me a chance to say goodbye properly." Then I smiled through my tears, because even in death, he was still protecting me. Later that week, Samantha told me there was more. "Mom, there's something else you need to know," I sighed. "Another secret?" She nodded. "Dad, he left a will, but not just for money. He left letters, for each of us." She handed me a small box, wooden, worn, with his initials carved into the top. Inside, there were 4 envelopes, one for each child, and one for me. My hands trembled as I opened mine. My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But don't be sad. I know you, my love. You'll cry, then you'll make tea, then you'll start talking to my photo again. And that's okay, but I want you to live. Don't lock yourself in the past, because you were never meant to grow old in grief. You were meant to keep growing in love. As for the children, don't be too hard on them. I made them promise not to come to the hospital. I didn't want them to see me like that. So if you're angry, be angry at me, not them. I froze. It wasn't their fault. It was him. He told them not to come. Tears poured down my face. I had blamed them, cursed them in my heart, and all along, they were just keeping his promise. That night, everything hit me at once. Months of anger, loneliness, and guilt crashed like a storm. I fell to my knees in the kitchen, clutching that letter. I hated them, Richard, I cried. I thought they abandoned you. I thought I lost them too. It felt like every piece of my heart shattered again. But this time, it wasn't out of loss. It was out of love, because suddenly, I saw everything clearly. He wasn't trying to separate us. He was trying to protect us, all of us, from the pain of watching him fade away. And in doing so, he became the bridge that brought us back together. After that day, everything changed. The house wasn't so quiet anymore. James started visiting every Sunday, fixing the fence, mowing the lawn, sometimes just sitting in silence, the way his father used to. Samantha took me shopping again, something we hadn't done since before the illness. We laughed about old dresses and cheap jewelry. For the first time, her laughter didn't sound forced. And Emma, she moved back home for a while. Every morning she'd help me bake, humming the same songs Richard loved. She said it made her feel close to him again. I started writing letters too, one for each of them, and one for Richard, that I keep tucked under his photo. Because now I understand. Life doesn't stop when someone dies. It just changes how love looks. If you've ever lost someone and blamed the wrong people, I want you to know something. Grief can blind you. It can twist love into anger, silence into punishment. But when truth finally comes out, it's like light breaking through the cracks. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pain. And as I sit here sipping tea by his old chair, I realize he never really left. He just taught me how to live without him. Subscribe for more stories from a heart that's still learning to heal. No one came, not even my own children. I stood there, in that cold, empty church, staring at my husband's coffin, and the only sound I heard was the echo of my own footsteps. That's when I realized, maybe it wasn't just my husband who died that day. Maybe my family did too. You know, they say when you get old, your family becomes your world. You give everything, your time, your love, your youth, and you expect, at least once, they'll show up when it truly matters. But life has a cruel way of testing hearts. That day I learned who really cared, and who only cared when it was convenient. My husband, Richard, passed away 3 weeks before his 68th birthday. He wasn't perfect, none of us are. But he was a good man. He worked hard. He loved his family. And even in his last days, his biggest worry wasn't death. It was whether our kids would be okay after he was gone. We had 3 children, all grown up now, each one living their own busy life. Samantha, our oldest, the career woman who never had time for calls, always saying, "Mom, I'll call you tomorrow." James, the middle child, charming but distant, always chasing success. And then Emma, our youngest, sweet but easily lost in her own world, trying to fit into a life full of parties and people who never truly cared for her. When Richard fell ill, I told them. I called each one, more than once. But somehow, everyone was too busy. Samantha had meetings. James had a flight. Emma had plans with friends. And I remember Richard lying there in bed, holding my hand, whispering, They'll come, Mary. They're just scared to see me like this. But he was wrong. They didn't come. The week before he passed, Richard could barely speak. He'd lost weight. His voice had faded into a whisper. Every morning I'd sit beside him with his favorite tea, chamomile with honey. And I'd read him the newspaper, pretending life was still normal. Sometimes he'd smile faintly and say, "You still read the headlines like they matter." And I'd laugh, even though inside I was breaking. One evening, he looked at me and said, "If they don't come now, don't force them. Maybe they'll understand later." I wanted to be angry, to shout, to cry. But all I could do was nod, because deep down, I knew he was right. You can't force love, not even from your own children. Then, the morning he passed, the world was quiet. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping the window. His hand was cold. His eyes were half open, looking toward the ceiling. And I knew he was gone. No final words. No goodbyes. Just silence. I called our children immediately. Samantha didn't pick up. I left a voicemail. James texted me. "I'm in Dubai, Mom. I'll try to come back soon." Emma answered, crying, "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'll come tomorrow, I promise." But tomorrow never came. The funeral was set for Saturday. I sent messages. I called again. The church was small, but it was Richard's favorite. He loved the smell of old wood, the stained glass windows, the soft echo of the choir. That morning I woke up early. I ironed my cream-colored coat, tied my scarf, the one he bought me on our 40th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "We're doing this together, okay?" When I reached the church, the air was cold and still. Only the priest was there, setting up candles. I kept glancing at the door, waiting, but nobody came. Not a single soul. No family. No friends. Just me, my husband's coffin, and a handful of empty pews. At first, I told myself, maybe they're stuck in traffic. Maybe something happened. But when the service started and ended, and the last prayer faded into silence, I knew they weren't coming. I sat there long after everyone left, just me and him, and for the first time in my life I felt truly invisible. As I sat there, memories came flooding back. The nights we couldn't afford dinner but laughed anyway. The long drives in that rusty old car. The times he'd sneak flowers from the neighbor's garden just to make me smile. We built everything together from nothing. We worked 2 jobs just to put our kids through college. We skipped vacations so they could have better Christmas presents. And now, they couldn't skip one party for their father's final goodbye. 2 days later, Samantha called. Her voice was shaky. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I couldn't handle it." I asked her, "Handle what, dear? Grieving or feeling guilty?" She didn't answer. James sent flowers. No note, just flowers. And Emma, she showed up a week later in tears, smelling like perfume and regret. She hugged me and said, "Mom, I didn't know it would hurt this much." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell, "You should have been there!" But all I did was hold her, because no matter how much they hurt me, they were still my children. And maybe that's what being a mother means. You forgive, even when your heart's been shattered. Weeks passed. The house was quieter than ever. I'd sit by Richard's chair sipping tea, talking to him as if he were still there. One afternoon, as I watered the plants, I found a letter tucked behind his photo frame. It was addressed to me. It said, "My love, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't want you to be sad. You gave me a beautiful life. Don't hold anger for the kids. They're still growing, even if they're grown. When they realize what really matters, they'll come back. Be patient, Mary. They'll need you more than you need them." I broke down. Not because of the words, but because he was right. He always was. So I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped checking my phone. And I started living again. For me. I joined a local community group, began baking for the neighbors. And for the first time in years, I laughed. Really laughed. because I realized something. You don't lose family when they forget you. You lose yourself when you stop living because of them. Months later, on what would have been our anniversary, Samantha called. She said she missed me, that she missed Dad. She cried for the first time in years. James visited the next week, quietly sitting by his father's chair, not saying much, but his silence said everything. And Emma, she spent the whole weekend helping me bake, asking stories about Dad, finally listening. They were late, but they came, and I realized grief doesn't end with death. It ends when love finally finds its way back home. If you're watching this, and you have someone you love but haven't spoken to in a while, call them. Don't wait for someday, because someday you might be standing in an empty church, wishing you had one more chance to say goodbye. Subscribe if you believe love deserves a second chance. I thought I had read every letter my husband ever wrote, but last night I found one more, hidden where I least expected. And after reading it, I realized the man I loved for 42 years had a secret he took to his grave, and it changed everything I thought I knew about our life together. When you grow old with someone, you think there are no surprises left. You think you've seen every side, every smile, every scar. But sometimes, even after they're gone, they still find a way to surprise you. After Richard's funeral and everything that came after, I thought I finally understood everything. His silence, his choices, even his death. But one cold November evening, I found something that made me question it all. It had been nearly a year since he passed. Life had settled into a new rhythm. Quiet, simple, and peaceful. The children visited more often. Sundays were loud again. Laughter, clinking dishes, even small arguments that made the house feel alive. But sometimes, late at night when everyone had gone home, I'd sit alone in the living room, holding his old sweater, breathing in the faint smell of coffee and cologne that still lingered. One night, I decided to finally clean out the attic, something I'd been putting off for months. I thought I was just going up there to organize old boxes, but what I found was the last piece of his heart he'd never meant for me to see. The attic was dusty and full of forgotten memories. Old furniture, Christmas decorations, a box of our children's school drawings. As I sorted through everything, I found an old wooden chest, locked, with his initials carved faintly on top. It wasn't the same box that held his letters. This one looked older, hidden under a pile of blankets. I'd never seen it before. At first, I thought it was just old papers or tools. But when I touched it, my heart raced. Something about it felt personal, secret. I found the key taped beneath one of his old books. He must have hidden it on purpose. When I opened the chest, a wave of dust and the faint scent of his aftershave filled the air. Inside were stacks of papers, old journals, photos, and one sealed envelope. It was addressed to me, but this one wasn't like the others. In the corner it said, "For Mary, only if you find it." My hands shook as I opened it. His handwriting was familiar, neat, steady, full of love. "My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means you found the chest. I never planned to tell you what's inside, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want to burden you with the past. Before we met, I wasn't the man you knew. I made mistakes, ones that haunted me long after. There's something I should have told you years ago. I had another child. I stopped reading. The words blurred through my tears. It was before we met, a long time ago. Her name was Clara. Her mother and I were young, foolish, and scared. When I found out she was pregnant, I wanted to stay, but life pulled us apart. I never saw the child, but I sent help from afar. Years later, I tried to find her, but by then it was too late. She'd been adopted. I didn't even know her name anymore. When I married you, I promised myself I'd tell you. But every time I looked at you, I couldn't bear to risk losing the only pure love I ever had. I dropped the letter on my lap. My heart pounded. Richard, the man I'd shared everything with. had kept this secret for 42 years. At first, I felt anger. How could he hide something so big from me? How could he live all these years, sitting at our dinner table watching our children grow, knowing there was another out there? One he never told me about. Then I felt sorrow, not just for me, but for that girl, for Clara. Somewhere in the world she had grown up without a father who wanted her, without even knowing she had a family that might have loved her. And then I felt guilt, because deep down, I understood why he never told me. He wasn't hiding shame. He was hiding pain. I couldn't sleep that night. The letter kept replaying in my mind. So the next morning I made tea, sat by the window, and decided I had to know more. I searched through the rest of the chest. Inside there were photos, old black and white ones. One caught my eye. A young woman, maybe 20, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. On the back in faded ink it said, Clara, 1974. That was the year before we met. I looked closer and suddenly froze. That baby had his eyes, the same deep, gentle brown eyes my children inherited. I knew it then. It wasn't a lie. She was real, so I called Samantha. I said, "Honey, I need you to come over. There's something we have to talk about." Within an hour, all 3 kids were sitting in my living room. And for the first time, I wasn't the one telling them about their father's secrets. I was the one revealing them. When I told them, the room went silent. Samantha leaned back, her face pale. James clenched his fists. Emma started crying. James said quietly, "So, we have a sister out there?" I nodded. "It seems so." Samantha looked at me. "Do we know where she is?" I shook my head. "He tried to find her, but he never could," Emma whispered. "Maybe we can." Her words hung in the air like hope and fear tangled together. That night, we sat for hours, looking through the box, reading his old notes, piecing together fragments of a story half forgotten by time. Weeks passed. Samantha used her contacts to search public records. James searched online archives. Emma reached out to adoption networks. For months, nothing. Then one morning, Samantha called me. Her voice was shaking. "Mom, I think we found her." My heart stopped. She sent me a photo. A woman in her 40s, kind eyes, soft smile. Her name was Clara Dawson, living 2 towns away. I stared at the screen, tears welling up. Richard's eyes, my husband's smile, and something in her face that felt familiar. A week later, I wrote her a letter. Not long, just simple words. "Dear Clara, you don't know me, but I believe we share someone very special. A man named Richard. If you're willing, I'd love to meet you. Mary." I mailed it and waited. Days passed. Then one morning, I found an envelope on my porch. "Dear Mary, I know who you are. I've known for years, and I've wanted to meet you too." The day we met, it felt like time stood still. She walked into my garden, nervous, clutching a small purse. I recognized her instantly. "Clara," I said softly. She smiled, eyes glistening. "You look just like he described." We sat on the porch, drinking tea, talking for hours. She told me she'd found out about Richard after he died. Through an old lawyer's note. She'd known he looked for her once, but never found her. "I don't blame him," she said, tears rolling down. "He was young. He made choices, but I think he loved me, even from afar." I nodded, holding her hand. "He did, and he would have been so proud to see you." When she smiled, it felt like Richard was sitting right there, his spirit alive in her eyes, in her warmth, in the way she listened. By sunset, she'd met my children. They hugged her like she'd always been part of the family, because maybe she always had been. That night, as I watched them laughing in the living room, Samantha showing her old photos, James telling stories, Emma baking cookies, I realized something. Richard's secret didn't destroy us. It completed us. He wasn't just protecting us from pain. He was trying to make peace with his past, to ensure every piece of his heart was finally found. And now, It was. Life doesn't always give us clean endings. Sometimes love is messy. Sometimes it hides, waits, and finds its way back years later, in letters, in faces, in forgiveness. When I look at Clara, I don't see betrayal. I see love that survived silence. I see a story that refused to end in regret. Maybe that's what love really is. Not about knowing every secret, but about choosing to keep loving, even after the truth. Because real love never runs out. It just changes shape. Subscribe for more stories that remind us love always finds its way home. When I arrived at the church, I thought maybe they'd already gone inside. Maybe they were sitting quietly, heads down, grieving in their own way. I even smiled a little through the tears, thinking, maybe I'd been too harsh on them. But as I stepped into the small hall, the air told me the truth before my eyes did. Empty pews. No whispers, no soft sobs, no flowers except the ones I'd brought myself. It was just me and my husband's coffin. The silence felt heavier than the grief, the kind of silence that screams at you. You're alone. I stood there for a long moment, holding my breath. My knees went weak, and I had to grip the edge of the pew just to keep from falling. The smell of lilies and old wood filled my nose. I remember whispering under my breath, "They'll come. Maybe they're just late." But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. I sat down in the front row, my heart breaking in slow motion. I looked at his photo sitting on the stand beside the coffin. That same smile I fell in love with 50 years ago. I reached out and traced his face with my trembling fingers. "It's just me, love," I said quietly. "Just me today." I talked to him for a long time. Told him how the house felt colder now. How his chair still leaned slightly to the left because he'd always rockin' it too hard. How the radio still played his favorite old songs. I told him how the children were busy, though I didn't say what with. I didn't want him to know that their busy meant champagne and dancing instead of their father's goodbye. The priest came up to me after a while. Kind man, maybe in his 40s. He cleared his throat gently and asked, "Should we begin, ma'am?" I nodded. Let's start." And so, the funeral of my husband, the man who worked himself to the bone for this family, began with one person in attendance. Me, the priest spoke softly, his words echoing through the empty space. It felt surreal, like the world had gone on pause, and I was trapped in a moment no one else cared to join. When it came time for me to say a few words, I stood, legs shaking, and looked at the empty chairs. I spoke anyway, because even if no one else was listening, I knew he was. "You were a good man," I said. "You didn't deserve this kind of farewell. You deserved to be surrounded by love, by family, by laughter. But maybe love isn't always where we expect it to be anymore." I swallowed hard. Maybe this world moves too fast to stop and say goodbye. And then, I just cried. I cried until my voice broke, until my body trembled. But in that silence, I felt something strange. Peace, like he was there, standing beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, whispering, "It's okay, let it go." When the service ended, I stayed long after everyone else left. I couldn't bring myself to walk away. The cemetery was quiet, wind brushing through the trees. I looked around one last time before they lowered his coffin into the ground. "You're not really gone," I whispered. "You're just somewhere I can't reach yet." I stood there until the sky turned orange, and that's when my phone buzzed. It was a photo, sent by my daughter. She was smiling, dressed up, holding a glass of champagne. Caption, "Best night ever. Love you all." No mention of her father. No message asking how the funeral went. Just that something inside me cracked that night. Not the sharp pain of heartbreak. I'd already been through that. This was emptier, numb, like someone had blown out the last candle inside my heart. That night, I sat by the window, holding one of my husband's old sweaters. It still smelled like him. Faint coffee, a bit of aftershave. and that warm scent of home. I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Family dinners, vacations, birthdays. Every smile felt like a lie now, because somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten what it meant to care. And I couldn't help but ask myself, did we raise them wrong? Did we love them too much? Did we make life too easy for them? Maybe we did. Maybe we gave so much, they never learned the value of giving back. A few days later, my youngest son called. His voice was casual, light. "Hey, Mom. Sorry, couldn't make it to Dad's thing. Had this important event. You know how it is. I didn't say a word for a long time. Just listened to the sound of his voice. So distant, so careless. Then I said softly, 'He asked for you, you know, before he passed. He said he wanted to hear your voice one more time.' He went quiet. I didn't know," he mumbled. "You didn't ask," I replied, my tone steady. "Not angry, just tired. He would have forgiven you, though." "He always did." There was a pause. Then he said, "I'll visit soon, Mom." I smiled sadly. "You won't, but that's okay." He didn't respond. The next morning, I sat at the dining table with a cup of tea and stared at the empty chair across from me. The chair he always sat in, reading the newspaper, grumbling about politics, or laughing at the comics section. It hit me then. This was it. This was the rest of my life now. Quiet mornings, silent dinners, echoes of laughter that once filled this house, now replaced with memories that hurt too much to replay. But even in that loneliness, something shifted inside me. I realized I couldn't wait for them anymore. Couldn't keep begging for love that wasn't coming. So I made a decision. I took out an old notebook, the one he used to write grocery lists in. And on the first page, I wrote, "From Grandma's diary, for the ones who still care." I decided I'd start telling my stories. All of them. The love, the heartbreak, the lessons, the regrets. Maybe my children wouldn't listen, but maybe someone out there would. Someone who still values family. Maybe another lonely soul out there would hear my story and feel less alone. And that's why I'm here, telling you all this. Because maybe, just maybe, someone watching this will remember to call their parents tonight, or visit their grandparents, or say, "I love you" before it's too late, because one day, it will be. And when that day comes, all you'll have left are the memories you chose to make. Or the ones you chose to miss. My husband may not have had the farewell he deserved, but through this story, through me, I'll make sure his memory never fades, because love doesn't die when people do. It dies when we stop remembering. If you felt this story, don't scroll. Watch the next one. It's been months since that day, since the funeral that no one came to, since the moment I realized that love, no matter how deep, doesn't always echo back. At first, the house felt unbearable. Too quiet, too big, too full of reminders. I'd walk past his chair and my heart would ache. The sound of the ticking clock felt louder than ever. Nights were the worst. The silence pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. But then something strange happened. I stopped crying. Not because the pain went away. No, pain doesn't vanish. It just settles in places you can live with. I stopped crying because I realized something. I could either let this loneliness consume me, or I could turn it into something meaningful. So I began talking, to him mostly. Sometimes out loud, sometimes in whispers. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing at my own jokes, pretending he was laughing too. But over time, I started talking not just to him, but for him. That's how From Grandma's Diary began. I recorded my first story one afternoon. I sat by the window with his old sweater on my lap and just started talking about life, love, regrets, all of it. I didn't plan it. I didn't even think anyone would listen. But somehow, people did. Thousands of people, all strangers, started commenting. This reminds me of my grandma. I called my mom after watching this. You made me cry. And suddenly, the emptiness in my house didn't feel so heavy anymore. It was like every word I spoke filled the space where loneliness used to live. I found a strange kind of peace in storytelling. The kind my husband always believed I had in me. He used to say, "You've got a way with words, you know. One day people will listen." I guess he was right. One evening, about 3 months later, I got a knock on my door. It was raining, one of those slow, steady rains that make everything feel nostalgic. I opened the door and there she was, my daughter. Her eyes were red. She looked smaller somehow, like guilt had made her shrink. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. For a second, I just stood there, frozen. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words, I'd been waiting months to hear them. But in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out. I stepped aside and said softly, "Come in." She walked in, and everything felt both strange and familiar. We sat in silence for a while before she finally spoke again. "I watched your videos," she said. "The one where you talked about Dad. I didn't know you were hurting that much." I smiled faintly. "I didn't want you to know. I just wanted to tell the truth." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was selfish," she said. "I thought he'd always be there. I didn't know how much time we had left." I reached for her hand. "None of us do, sweetheart. That's why you have to make the most of the moments you still have." We sat there, holding hands, both crying and smiling through the pain. It wasn't a perfect reunion. It didn't erase what happened, but it was a start. A week later, my sons called. Then they visited. They brought flowers, old photos, and awkward laughter. We sat together for the first time in years, not pretending everything was fine, but just being there. And for the first time since his death, it felt like a family again. Broken maybe, but still a family. The next morning, I visited his grave. The grass had grown around it now, soft and green. I brought fresh daisies, his favorite, and knelt down. "Guess what?" I said with a little laugh. "They came back, our kids. Maybe it's not too late after all." I placed my hand on the cool stone. "You'd be proud, you know. You always said family finds its way back even when it gets lost. You were right again." I sat there for a while, just listening to the wind, the rustle of the trees, the quiet peace that filled my chest. "I miss you," I whispered. "But I think I'm gonna be okay now." When I got home, I recorded one last video for that series. This time I didn't cry. I just smiled. I said, "Life has a strange way of teaching us lessons. Sometimes it takes losing something to see what really matters. My husband taught me love. My loneliness taught me strength. And my story taught me that even pain can have purpose." I paused, looking at the camera. "So if you're watching this, call them. The ones you've been avoiding. The ones you think will always be there. Because one day they won't be." Then I smiled softly. "And when that day comes, you'll wish you had one more chance." Now, every evening when I sit down to record, I light a candle beside his photo, the same one from the funeral. It's my little ritual. A reminder that he's still here, in every story, in every word, in every heartbeat. He didn't get the farewell he deserved that day, but through these stories, he's remembered by thousands. And maybe that's a better kind of legacy, because love isn't about who shows up at the funeral. It's about who keeps the memory alive after it's over. And that's what I'll keep doing. For him, for me, for anyone who's ever felt forgotten. If this story touched your heart, stay. The next one's waiting for you. A few weeks passed after my children came back into my life. Things were calmer now. We weren't perfect, far from it. But there was peace. Small conversations over tea, awkward laughter, even quiet dinners that didn't feel so hollow anymore. But life has a way of surprising you, even when you think you've already seen everything it has to show. It was a cold Sunday morning. The sky was gray, The kind of gray that makes the world look softer, like an old photograph. I decided to finally clean out the attic, the place where memories go to sleep. Dust danced in the sunlight as I opened old boxes filled with everything from our wedding photos to the kids' school drawings. Then I found it. A small, brown envelope, sealed, yellowed at the edges, with my name written in his handwriting. My heart stopped. It was his handwriting, my husband's. The date on it was 2 days before he died. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I sat on the floor, holding that fragile piece of paper like it was made of glass. I whispered, "You old fool. What did you leave me this time?" I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The ink had faded a little, but his words were still strong. Still him. "My dearest, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there anymore. Not in the way I used to be. But I want you to know something before you let the sadness take over. I know the kids haven't been around much. I know it hurts you more than you'll ever admit. But don't be angry with them. Please. We raised them in a different world. A faster one. Louder one. One that forgets how to slow down. They don't understand silence the way we do. They don't know what loss feels like yet. But they'll learn, my love. And when they do, they'll come back. To you. To home. So when that day comes, don't push them away out of hurt. Open the door, feed them. Hug them like only you can. Because they'll need that more than anything. You've always been the heart of this family. And even when I'm gone, you still will be. Don't forget to laugh. Don't stop telling stories. Don't stop loving them. Even when they forget how to love you back. Yours forever, Richard." By the time I reached the end, I couldn't see through the tears. My chest felt heavy and light at the same time. Like grief and joy had decided to live together inside me. I sat there on that dusty attic floor, clutching the letter to my heart, whispering his name. You always knew what to say. And he was right. He always was. Later that evening, when my children came to visit, I placed the letter on the table. "Your father left this," I said softly. "He wrote it before he passed." They hesitated at first, afraid maybe. But my daughter reached out and began reading aloud. As she read his words, those simple, loving words, I saw their faces change. My sons, who had always tried to hide behind their pride, looked down at their hands. My daughter's voice cracked as she reached the part where he said, "They'll come back to you." When she finished, no one said a word. Then my youngest son whispered, "He forgave us, even before we asked for it." And I nodded. That's what love does. That night, we sat together by the fireplace talking about him. Really talking. For the first time. We shared stories, laughter, even tears. I showed them his old watch, the one he never took off. My daughter slipped it on her wrist, saying, "I want to keep it close." And I said, "He'd like that." It felt like he was there, sitting in his chair, smiling. The warmth in that room wasn't just from the fire. It was from forgiveness, finally finding its way home. A few days later, I framed the letter. It now hangs right above the mantel, next to his photo. Every time I look at it, I remember what he wrote. "Don't stop telling stories." So I won't. I'll keep telling them. For him, for them, for everyone who's ever felt unseen. And maybe that's what life really is. One long story of love, loss, and coming back. Because even when people forget to show up, love still does. In letters, in memories, in the spaces between grief and forgiveness. He was gone, but somehow, through his words, he brought us all back together again. If this story touched your heart, keep listening. The next one's waiting to be told. The letter stayed on the mantel for weeks, a quiet reminder of forgiveness written in faded ink. I'd look at it each morning while making tea, the steam curling toward the frame, as if the warmth might reach him somehow. The children came by more often now, not out of guilt, but because they wanted to. That was new. One Sunday afternoon, my daughter showed up with her laptop and a nervous smile. "Mom, I've been thinking, she said, setting her bag on the table. What if we helped you? You know, make your stories look a little better online. You've got people commenting from everywhere. Maybe we could edit your videos together. I blinked at her. The same girl who once missed her father's funeral because of a party was now asking to help me tell his story to the world. You think people would want that? I asked softly. They already do, she said. They just need to see more of you. So we began. At first, she sat beside me, teaching me about thumbnails and titles, things I never thought I'd understand. My sons joined too. One handled the sound. Another helped with captions. It was strange watching them argue about color correction. Instead of whose fault it was, they drifted apart. The living room, once so painfully quiet, now hummed with the sound of editing clicks and laughter. Some nights we'd stay up late reviewing comments. People wrote things like, "This story saved my marriage," or "I visited my grandmother today because of you." Each message felt like another stitch closing a wound we didn't know was still open. Learning to listen. Again one evening, as I was finishing a script about second chances, my youngest son asked, "Mom, when you tell these stories, do you forgive us a little more each time?" I looked at him, really looked at him, the lines under his eyes, the hesitation in his voice. "I already forgave you," I said. "Your father did too. You just needed time to forgive yourself." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," I replied. "It's just necessary." From then on, he never missed a recording day. The channel that became a family. From Grandma's diary wasn't just mine anymore. It became ours. My daughter handled social media messages, replying kindly to strangers who poured out their hearts. My sons began writing ideas for new stories, some based on their lives, some on lessons they wished they'd learned sooner. We started receiving letters in the mail too, piles of envelopes with handwriting from every corner of the world. People sent drawings, poems, even photos of their families reunited after years apart. One woman wrote, "Your story made my son talk to me again after 5 years. Thank you for giving me my child back." I remember placing that letter beside my husband's frame and whispering, "See, love, you're still fixing families." Finding purpose in pain, it's strange how pain can become purpose if you let it breathe long enough. For years, I thought loneliness was the end of my story, but now I see it was just the middle, the pause before the melody returns. Each time I turned on the camera, I didn't just talk to strangers, I talked to my children, to the younger versions of them who once slammed doors and stormed off, to the older versions who now sat quietly, listening. The camera stopped feeling like glass and plastic. It felt like a window that let light back into our house. When the past came knocking one rainy afternoon, a message appeared in the channel's inbox. It was from a woman named Ellen, my husband's sister. We hadn't spoken in years. Family arguments had left cracks too deep to fix back then. She wrote, "I've been watching your videos. I think it's time we talked. I miss you." When I showed the message to my children, they exchanged nervous glances. My daughter said, "Maybe this is another chance to make things right." And so we invited her over for dinner. That night felt like stepping back in time. When she arrived, her eyes filled with tears before a word was spoken. We hugged, a long trembling hug that erased a decade of silence. Over dinner we talked about him, her brother, my husband, and laughed about the silly things he used to do. After she left, my daughter whispered, "You know, Dad's letter didn't just bring us back. It's bringing everyone back." I smiled. That's what real love does. It doesn't end. It expands. The first live story months later, we reached 500,000 subscribers. A number so large it didn't feel real. My kids insisted we host a live stream. A grandma's evening, they called it. I was terrified. I'd never spoken live before. What if I forgot my words? What if I cried? But when I sat down and saw thousands of hearts and messages flooding the screen, the fear disappeared. I started talking, not from a script this time, just from the heart. I thought loneliness was the end for me, I said. But it became my beginning. I thought my children forgot me, but they were just lost. Sometimes people don't know they're lost until a story finds them. Behind the camera, my daughter wiped her eyes. My son squeezed my shoulder. When the live ended, the chat was filled with people saying things like, "I'm calling my mom right now," and "I forgive my dad." That night, my daughter said, "Mom, I think this is what he meant. This is the family finds its way back he wrote about." I nodded. And not just ours. The morning after the live stream, the house was filled with the soft pinging of notifications, emails, messages, invitations. My grandchildren called it going viral, but I called it something else, being heard. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the sunlight hit the old curtains, and whispered, "He would have loved this, wouldn't he?" My daughter smiled from across the room. "He'd be bragging about you to everyone in heaven, Mom." For the first time in years, laughter filled the air instead of silence. Letters that changed everything. That week, we received a letter from a small town 3 hours away. A woman named Rita had written, "Your story made my husband and I talk after 8 years of living like strangers. Could you come visit? We'd like to thank you in person." I almost said no. Travel felt impossible at my age. But my sons insisted, "Mom, it's time people met you. They need to see the face behind the diary." And so we packed up our little car, camera equipment, microphones, a box of homemade cookies, and a notebook where I'd written the line, "Stories heal when shared in person." The first visit Rita's home was a small farmhouse surrounded by blooming sunflowers. She greeted us at the gate, tears already glistening in her eyes. Her husband stood beside her, awkward at first. But when he shook my hand, his grip trembled. "I used to think forgiveness was weakness," he said. "Then I watched your video about your husband's letter." Inside, they showed me the letter they'd written to each other after years of silence. Simple, honest, and full of pain turned into peace. We sat in their kitchen recording a short interview for the channel. Rita said, "I just wanted people to know that even broken love can bloom again." When we uploaded that video a week later, it reached millions. The comment section became a river of people confessing, apologizing, reconnecting. My daughter read them aloud that night, her voice trembling. Someone said, "I hugged my mother after 10 years because of this story." I closed my eyes, whispering a thank you to the stars. A journey begins. That single trip turned into a journey. We began visiting people who wrote to us. Widows, estranged families, single parents, even young people who said my words kept them from giving up. We filmed everything. Laughter, tears, awkward silences that spoke louder than words. Each video ended with the same line I always said. "This diary doesn't belong to me. It belongs to everyone who remembers how to love." Soon, From Grandma's Diary wasn't just a YouTube channel. It became a movement. People started tagging their own videos. From Grandma's Diary Challenge, where they'd record apologies, forgiveness letters, or visits to long-lost family members. Watching those videos made my heart ache in the best way possible. I'd never imagined that my quiet grief could echo in so many hearts. When Pain Meets Hope won, Visit took us to an elderly home where a man named Harold, 82, sat alone with no visitors for years. His nurse said he watched every one of my episodes. When we met, he held my hand and said, "Your voice makes me feel like my wife never left." I smiled softly. Maybe she never did. Maybe love just changes rooms. He laughed. A deep, shaky laugh that turned into tears. We filmed that moment too, but later my daughter hesitated to upload it. "It's too raw, Mom," she said. "That's why it needs to be seen," I replied. That video became one of the most watched on our channel. People commented things like, "I'm visiting my grandpa today." And we forget how precious time is until someone reminds us. I realized then that vulnerability was the real secret of storytelling. Not perfection, not scripts. Just truth, recognition, but not the kind that matters most. Months later, we were invited to a national awards ceremony for digital humanitarian storytelling. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, and someone handed me a golden plaque. But as I stood on that stage, I didn't feel proud. I felt humbled. "This award isn't mine," I told the crowd. "It belongs to every person brave enough to face their past and forgive." I just held the pen. They wrote the story. People clapped. But in my heart, I whispered a quiet thank you to my late husband. That night, back at the hotel, my children and I celebrated with tea instead of champagne. We laughed, reminisced, and for once no one looked at their phone. My daughter leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You know, Mom, this all started because you refused to stop loving." I smiled. "That's the only thing I've ever been stubborn about." A letter from a grandchild. The next morning, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. It was from my eldest granddaughter, Lily. Inside was a note in her uneven handwriting. "Dear Grandma, I used to think your stories were for old people, but now I watch them every night. I want to be like you when I grow up. Kind but strong. Can I help too?" Tears blurred the ink as I read. I realized then that my legacy wouldn't be measured in subscribers or awards, but in hearts like hers that chose kindness over pride. That evening, I told my children, "When I'm gone, promise me you'll keep this going. Keep telling stories. Keep reminding people that love doesn't die. It just needs to be spoken aloud." They promised, and I believed them. I always thought I'd have more time. Time to finish another episode. Time to bake one more batch of cookies for the crew. Time to tell one more story before the sun went down. But lately, when the evenings arrive, the light stays on the curtains a little longer than it should, as if even the day doesn't want to leave me alone. The silence, after the applause, after our world tour ended, I came home to a quiet house. The cameras were gone, the suitcases unpacked, and only the ticking clock kept me company. For a while, that silence scared me. Fame had filled every corner of our lives, and now it was just me, my chair, and the hum of the refrigerator. I used to think silence meant loneliness. Now I know it just means truth has nothing left to prove. My hands trembled when I touched the old diary, the one that started it all. Its pages were yellowed and soft, like my own skin. On the first page, my late husband's handwriting stared back at me. "To my love, write everything you feel. One day it will help someone else." And he was right. It helped millions. But tonight I decided to write the last page, the final letter. I set the camera on the table, pressed record, and spoke like I was talking to him. No script, no edits, just breath, heart, and honesty. "Hello, my love. If you can hear me, I kept your promise. The stories we lived, the pain we carried, I shared them all. I turned grief into something gentle. I made strangers into family. And somehow, I became the grandmother of the internet." I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hides tears behind it. "Do you remember the day we planted that tree in the backyard? It's taller than the roof now. The kids take pictures under it every spring. It's funny. I used to hate that tree when it dropped leaves all over the porch. Now I sweep them up like gold. I wanted to tell you, I'm not afraid anymore. Not of death, not of being forgotten. Because stories don't die. They just change who tells them." The room blurred for a moment. I blinked away the wetness. If love had a face, it would look like forgiveness. That's what I learned after you left. And if this is my last letter, let it be a thank you. For the laughter, the storms, and for leaving me a heart stubborn enough to keep beating through it all. I paused the recording and smiled at the red light blinking back at me. The last video from Grandma's diary was ready. The next morning, my children arrived to visit, all of them. We sat in the kitchen, the smell of toast and coffee filling the air, the sound of life spilling out in small noises, plates clinking, chairs scraping, someone humming. I looked at their faces, grown, changed, softer now. Once I thought I'd lost them forever. Now they couldn't stop calling. Funny how life circles back when you least expect it. I told them about the letter. They begged me not to talk like it was the end. I just smiled. It's not the end, darling. It's the echo. They helped me upload the video that night. I titled it simply, "If you're watching this, you still have time." Within hours, it spread faster than anything I'd ever posted. Millions watched. People cried, wrote letters, lit candles, hugged their mothers, and I just sat quietly on the porch, watching the sky melt into shades of orange and pink, whispering, "Look at them, love. They finally understand." When Lily took the pen a week later, I got sick, not the kind that medicine can fix. My body was slowing down, like a record player reaching its last song. But Lily, my little sunshine, sat by my bedside every day, reading the comments out loud. "Grandma, someone said your video made them forgive their dad." "Grandma, someone named a charity after your diary." "Grandma, you're trending in 42 countries." I chuckled weakly. That's too much for one old lady. She took my hand and whispered, "Then let me carry it now." And that's when I realized this wasn't my ending. It was her beginning. I asked her to open the top drawer of my desk. Inside was a small brown envelope labeled, "For the next storyteller." She opened it and found an old fountain pen, the same one I'd used to write my first letter decades ago. "It still works?" she asked. "Only if you promise to write from your heart," I said. She nodded through tears. "I promise." The final morning that night, I dreamt of my husband standing under the tree in our backyard. He smiled, his arms open. Behind him were all the people I'd met through my stories. Rita, Harold, the families we helped. They waved, calling my name softly. I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet, peaceful. I watched the first light creep through the curtains. I whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for the world I'd leave behind. Let them keep telling stories. Let them keep choosing love. And then, with the soft hum of birds outside, I closed my eyes. The world after Grandma. 3 days later, the news spread across every platform. The voice behind from Grandma's diary passes away peacefully at home. But instead of grief, the world responded with warmth. Millions lit candles, posted letters, and shared their own family videos under the tag, "The Final Letter," everywhere. Schools, parks, hospitals, people gathered to read aloud her words. "If you're watching this, you still have time." Lily uploaded one last video, her eyes red but shining. "Grandma always said stories don't end. They find new hearts. So this is not goodbye. This is just the next page." She held up the old pen, smiling through her tears. "Welcome to From Grandma's Diary, the next chapter." The comments section exploded with love. People wrote from every corner of the planet. "She changed my life." I called my mom today. I started writing again. And in that digital sea of words, Grandma's spirit lived on, not as a memory, but as a movement, epilogue. The letter never ends. Years later, when the tree in Grandma's backyard grew so tall that its branches brushed the clouds, Lily sat beneath it with her own daughter. She opened a fresh notebook and began to write. "Once there was a grandmother who believed love could outlive everything. She told her stories, and they traveled farther than she ever could. And though she left this world quietly, her words still speak in every forgiven heart." The little girl looked up and asked, Did Grandma really know all those people? Lily smiled. She knew everyone who ever needed to hear. You still have time. The wind rustled the leaves above them, and for a brief second it sounded like laughter. Soft, familiar, eternal. And somewhere between the pages of every diary, her voice still whispers, "This is Grandma," signing often but never saying goodbye. The week after the final video, the house refused to stay still. Every morning the front gate rattled, the mailbox creaked, and footsteps came up the gravel path. Neighbors, strangers, delivery drivers with arms full of envelopes. Lily counted the first day's letters. 43. By the 5th day, there were thousands. They came from everywhere. Nepal, Brazil, Nigeria, small towns in Alaska, busy streets in Delhi. Some were written on scented paper, others on napkins or torn notebook pages. One arrived scribbled on a bus ticket that simply said, "She saved me." Lily's hands shook as she opened the first pile. Inside each envelope was a story of forgiveness, regret, love rediscovered. Her father, Mark, watched from the porch. "Your grandma would have read every single one of those," he said. Lily smiled softly. "Then so will we." Sorting hope, they turned the living room into what looked like a tiny post office. Boxes labeled family reunions, forgiven friends, lost loves, second chances. Each night after dinner, the family gathered around the dining table with tea and scissors. They opened, read, cried, and laughed together. One letter read, "I watched her final video with my teenage son. We hadn't spoken in months. We cried, then made pancakes together for the first time. Thank you for giving me back my child." Another came from a prison in Texas. "I may never leave this place, but your grandma made me believe I can still be a good father from behind these walls." By the 10th letter, Lily had already made up her mind. "These shouldn't just sit in boxes," she said. "They should become stories, the new beginning." She opened the old camera Grandma had used, the one with scratches and duct tape on its side, and placed it gently on the tripod. Her mother looked uncertain. "You sure about this? People will expect you to be her." Lily smiled, brushing her hair back. "I'm not her. I'm her echo." She pressed record. "Hi, everyone. This is Lily, Grandma's granddaughter. We've been getting thousands of letters from all over the world, and I want to share them with you. These aren't just letters. They're proof that kindness doesn't die with the person who started it." Her voice trembled but stayed steady enough. The first video, Letters to Grandma, Episode 1, went live that evening. It showed Lily reading 3 letters aloud, with soft piano in the background. No fancy editing, no filters, just raw voices and paper rustling. By morning, it had 1 million views. People commented things like, "I can hear Grandma's spirit in your voice," and "She's smiling somewhere." Finding Grandma in the words as the days passed, the house filled with letters even faster. Schools began sending packages labeled "Our Students' Diary Pages." Hospitals mailed video clips of patients sharing thank you notes. One little girl drew a picture of Grandma holding the world in her hands. Every night before recording, Lily would light a candle near Grandma's chair. Sometimes, when the flame flickered just right, she'd whisper, "Okay, Grandma, tonight's your turn to listen." Her father handled filming. Her aunt handled editing. They didn't chase perfection. They chased honesty. The series became a ritual, a bridge between the living and the lessons left behind. An unexpected visitor. 3 months later, a gray-haired man arrived at their door with a weathered envelope. He introduced himself as Mr. Calder, a retired postman. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat to Lily, "I delivered your grandmother's first fan letter years ago. Been watching ever since. Found this in my old locker when I retired." The envelope had Grandma's name written in her husband's handwriting. Lily gasped, "But he passed long before the channel started." The old postman smiled. Maybe that's why it waited so long to arrive. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with time. My love, if stories really travel like you believe, then one day mine will find its way back to you. The family sat in silence. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Lily whispered. She must have been waiting for this. That night, Lily recorded a special video titled, "The Letter That Found Its Way Home." In it, she read the message aloud, voice trembling, then said, "Maybe Grandma was right all along. Love doesn't need a calendar. It just knows where it belongs." The video went viral instantly. News outlets called it the message across time. But for the family, it wasn't news. It was closure. The idea came to Lily one quiet evening, while she was sorting through letters at Grandma's old desk. Outside, the world had already gone dark, but the window still reflected the soft light of her candle. The same candle she lit before every recording. "What if," she whispered, "we all met? Not online, not on screens. In person." She looked at the piles of envelopes spilling onto the floor, the voices trapped inside paper. Grandma had connected hearts through pixels. Maybe it was time to connect hands through presents. She pulled out a blank sheet and began writing an invitation. "To everyone whose life was touched by From Grandma's Diary. We're having a reunion. A day of letters, stories, and memories. Under the tree where it all began." By morning, the invitation had become a post. By noon, it had gone viral. And by night, thousands had RSVP'd yes, preparations. The backyard hadn't seen that much energy in decades. Mark strung fairy lights between branches. Lily's brothers set up tents and tables. Neighbors offered food, chairs, music. Even the postman, Mr. Calder, volunteered to bring a truckload of letters that still arrived daily. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. Someone joked, "Feels like Grandma planned the weather herself." Lily smiled. She probably did. They decided the reunion would be simple. No speeches, no stage, no sponsors. Just stories, just people. They placed a long wooden table under the old tree and covered it with thousands of opened letters, like leaves that had fallen and returned home. The day arrives on the morning of the reunion. The sky turned the same shade of gold Grandma used to call Hope Light. Families arrived one after another, holding flowers, photographs, even handwritten pages wrapped in ribbon. Lily greeted each person with a hug. She didn't know most of them, yet somehow she did. Every face carried a familiar softness, the same kind of calm Grandma once had. A woman in her 50s handed Lily a box. "This is my husband's diary," she said. "He wrote in it after watching your grandma's videos. He wanted you to have it." Lily opened the box. Inside lay a notebook filled with shaky handwriting. Confessions, regrets, thank yous. She placed it gently on the table. "It belongs here," she said. "The stories begin anew." The yard was alive with voices. A circle formed under the tree, and people began to share why they'd come. A teenager spoke first. "I used to hate my mom," he said, eyes down. "But after I saw Grandma's video, 'If you're watching this, you still have time,' I called her. Now we talk every day." Applause rippled through the crowd. Not loud, just honest. Then an elderly woman stepped forward. "I watched every episode with my nursing home friends. We started calling ourselves the Diary Club. Some of them couldn't make it, but they sent hugs." She handed Lily a small crocheted heart. "She taught us to forgive ourselves," the woman whispered. Lily felt her throat tighten. "She taught me that too." Unexpected guests late in the afternoon. 2 young men approached. They looked nervous, clutching a framed photo. "We're Sam and Eli," one said. "We're the sons of Harold, the man from the nursing home in your grandmother's video." Lily gasped softly. The one who said her voice made him feel his wife never left. They nodded. "He passed away last winter, but he asked us to come here and thank her family in person." They placed the photo at the base of the tree. It showed Harold smiling, holding a small radio. Lily knelt, touched the frame. He's part of her story forever now. Letters in the wind as evening fell. The wind picked up, gentle, playful. Some of the letters on the table fluttered into the air, spinning like white butterflies. Children chased them laughing. Instead of stopping them, Lily let them go. Let them fly, she said softly. That's how Grandma would have wanted it. One landed in her hands. She unfolded it and read aloud. Dear Grandma, you don't know me, but because of you, I chose not to end my life that night. I chose to write instead. Lana settled over the yard, heavy, sacred. People held hands without needing to be told. That's why we're here, Lily whispered. To remind each other that every heartbeat still counts. Grandma's presence. When the sun dipped behind the hills, the fairy lights began to glow. Someone played Grandma's favorite song on a small speaker, a gentle tune she used to hum while cooking. Lily looked up at the tree. Its branches swayed like it was dancing along. She felt it then, that unmistakable warmth. Not grief, not absence, presence. Grandma wasn't gone. She was everywhere. In the letters, in the laughter, in the wind between the leaves. Mark put his arm around his daughter. You did it, he said quietly. You brought her story full circle. No, Lily replied. We all did. Closing the night before everyone left, Lily climbed onto a small wooden stool and raised her voice just enough. Grandma used to say stories don't end. They just find new hearts. So, before you go, I want each of you to take a letter from the table. Doesn't matter whose. Just take one that speaks to you. People moved forward, carefully choosing letters, as if selecting stars from the sky. Some cried, some smiled, some whispered thank you. When the last guest left, only a few envelopes remained. The ones addressed simply to Grandma. Lily gathered them, tied them with a ribbon, and placed them under the tree. Good night, Grandma, she said. They finally came home. The wind rustled in response, soft, approving. I don't know what happens after death. All I know is that one moment, I was breathing, and the next I was watching. No pain, no fear, just stillness. A stillness so deep, it felt like the world was holding its breath too. And then, in that stillness, I saw them. My children, my Lily, my home, my diary, all still there, living, breathing, moving forward. At first, I wanted to reach out, to tell them I was okay, to wipe their tears and whisper, "Don't cry, my loves. I'm right here." But the more I watched, the more I realized they were learning to live without needing to hear me, because they could feel me. The day of the reunion, I watched them gather under that old oak tree, the one where I used to hang wind chimes that sang to the breeze. There were so many faces, young, old, broken, hopeful, and every single one of them had a story. I listened to them talk about forgiveness, about second chances, about love they thought they'd lost but found again through words I once wrote alone in my room. Who would have thought that a lonely old woman sitting in a dimly lit corner writing her heart out would someday bring strangers together? Who would have thought my pain would turn into someone else's hope? Lily stood in the center, glowing, steady, and brave. I could see myself in her eyes. She had that same mix of sadness and strength I used to see in the mirror. She smiled as she listened to their stories, and I knew. She wasn't mourning anymore. She was continuing. The foundation months passed in their world. Time is different here. It doesn't rush or drag. It just exists. Lily turned my diary into something far beyond what I ever imagined. She called it From Grandma's Foundation, a home for forgotten hearts. Every month they hosted open letters. Anyone could write about regret, pain, forgiveness, or hope. And instead of being judged, people were met with kindness. They started workshops in schools, counseling for single mothers, story nights for widowers, even letter drives for soldiers overseas. all from one little diary. My diary. Sometimes I'd drift by during their meetings, invisible, silent, just listening, and every time someone laughed, I'd feel it echo in this side of the world, like a heartbeat connecting two realms. The dream visit one night, I visited Lily in her sleep. She was sitting at her desk, editing a video, her eyes tired but peaceful. I stood beside her, though she couldn't see me. I whispered softly, "You've done more than I ever could, sweetheart. You turned my story into a bridge for others." She paused in her dream, as if she heard me. Her lips moved slightly. "Grandma?" I smiled. "I'm here, my Lily. Always." She turned and hugged me. Or maybe it was just her dream self hugging the air. But it felt real enough to make my heart tremble. Before I left, I touched her cheek and whispered, "Tell them their stories matter, even the broken ones." And when she woke up, she posted a video titled, "Every broken story still beats." It reached millions. The oak tree became a symbol. People started visiting from everywhere. Some left letters, others flowers, and some just stood there silently, listening to the wind. Mark placed a plaque at its base. "This is where love learned to outlive loss." Lily would sometimes sit under it for hours, reading letters aloud, and every time the wind would pick up, carrying her voice far beyond the yard. That's how I travel now, through the wind, through the paper, through the quiet moments between heartbeats. The family healed my children, the same ones who once didn't come to their father's funeral, eventually found their way back. Guilt had built walls between us, but Lily's love became the hammer that broke them down. I saw my eldest son visiting Mark one Sunday morning. They sat on the porch, both too proud to cry, yet both crying anyway. "I should have been there, Dad," my son said. "You're here now," Mark replied, and that was enough. My other daughter began writing again, the same one who used to run away from anything that reminded her of family. Now she writes letters to me every week. She burns them under the tree, and I read them as smoke curling in the twilight sky. They finally learned what I had always tried to teach them, that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply gives it somewhere soft to rest. The birthday on what would have been my 70th birthday, Lily threw a celebration not of mourning, but of gratitude. They called it Letters of Light. Instead of candles, they lit hundreds of paper lanterns. Each lantern carried a message written by someone whose life had been touched by my story. As they released them into the sky, it looked like the stars themselves were rising from the earth. One lantern drifted higher than the rest. It carried Lily's message. "To Grandma, you were never gone. You just became everything good that stayed." That's when I cried. Yes, even here you can cry. Tears of joy are allowed anywhere love exists. A new voice years passed, and Lily grew older. Her hair silvered, her eyes softened. But her voice, that same voice that once quivered reading my letters, grew stronger. She became Grandma Lily to millions online, and she started her own diary. It began with the same words I once wrote long ago. "At my husband's funeral, no one came but me." But she didn't stop there, she continued. And yet, through one woman's pain, thousands learned what love really means. People began calling her the grandma who heals hearts. And I couldn't help but smile, because she was living proof that legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about continuing to give even after you're gone. The final visit one night, Lily grew very still. The candles around her flickered. Her breathing slowed, and I knew she was crossing over. I waited by the same oak tree, my heart steady, my arms open. When her spirit finally appeared, she looked just as she did when she was 30. Bright, alive, free. "Grandma," she said softly. her eyes full of tears and laughter. "You did it," I replied. "You carried the light further than I ever could." She looked around at the endless meadow, the same one I'd been walking through since I left. "Is this heaven?" she asked. "It's what you made it," I said. "Every act of kindness, every letter, every story. It built this place." We walked together through fields that shimmered like memory itself. She took my hand. "What happens now?" "Now," I smiled. "We rest. And maybe we write again. Back in the world, the oak tree still stands. Children now play where my grandchildren once cried. Letters still come, hundreds every month, each beginning with, 'Dear Grandma.' And somewhere in every whisper of wind, in every flicker of light, in every trembling voice that says, 'I forgive you.' I am there. I am the silence between words, the warmth between tears, the pause before someone decides to live again." My story began in loneliness. It ended in love, and love, my dear ones, never really ends.